I have to bring something up. I know that I don't know what we're doing. Closing, turning, I'm not sure, but I'm loving this conversation. Something that was alarming to me, and it's a big part of me as a person with Haitian roots, Haitian descent, is the Raoul Peck's piece showed the involvement of the church.
That was my co-host, Tony Sherry, ruminating on the contradiction of the Catholic Church. On one hand, it's an institute of destruction. On the other, it was and is a comfort to his parents' generation. The documentary that gave him that perspective is a 4-part miniseries called Exterminate All the Brutes.
When I started it, I had no clue about was it going to be a film, you know? And for me, that was the only way to go into this project, is to take the risk to tackle such a huge chunk of history. And in particular, because it was the most important chunk of history. It was basically the moment of definition of who we are today, or who the Eurocentric world is, and have been dominating history for hundreds of years.
This is Warren Wade Anderson,
Reggie Valentin,
Mark Barozzi,
Tony Sherry.
Welcome to the 7th episode of Antilles. The voice you just heard belongs to the inventive and entrepreneurial Raoul Peck, director, producer, and writer of Exterminate All the Brutes, a unique soul that uses the film medium to tackle difficult questions about race, class, and power. Peck was born in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, on September 9th, 1953, to a middle-class family. Around 1961, his father, an agronomist, accepted a professor of agriculture position at the University of Kinshasa in the Congo. This made it possible for Raoul, his mother, and 3 brothers to flee the despotic regime of Francois Duvalier. As it turns out, this was the first of many relocations for the Peck brothers. Mr. Peck went on to study in Kinshasa, Brooklyn, New York, Orleans, France, and Humboldt, Germany, where he went on to receive a bachelor degree in industrial engineering and economics. He came back to Germany a few years later to study and complete a graduate program in film at the German Film and Television Academy in Berlin. Since then, he has used his training to shine lights on oppressive governments and systems of oppression. This was true in his first feature film debut, Lumumba, a story about the very short life of the Congo's first prime minister. It is certainly true of this 4-part documentary.
So, part one of Exterminate All the Brutes, it recounts
It's called The Disturbing Confidence of Ignorance.
Yes,
right.
yes.
The Disturbing Confidence of Ignorance, which recounts...
Could you summarize? Is it possible to sort of summarize it?
Well, I'm going to try.
That is a lot. That's a lot. There's a lot in that episode.
In the most concise way.
It's a lot of pressure.
Possible. So what it does, it recounts a story of survival and violence. The story of humanity, as he says, is defined into 3 words: civilization, colonization, and extermination. So it's a story about those who won and the alternative facts they've been peddling for years, which is what we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
I
mean, if I were to summarize it just for my own self, just for my own sort of edification here, I see it as the origins of white supremacy.
The origins of white supremacy, yeah.
Let me challenge you guys, because I talk to a lot of people and I listen to a lot of people, even if I don't agree. Is it fair that a lot of people who might even contribute to white supremacy don't even know that they are.
Yes. Just like we've been conditioned as victims of white supremacy to think a certain way too.
I'll push back in a more universal way. Just because
white supremacy is a provocative word.
But let me push back.
Yeah,
I'm pushing back. Like, just because you didn't understand that beating your son was a wrong thing to do, does it get you off the hook because he's like, I didn't know?
That's a great point.
Right, but it's not even I didn't know, it's I don't agree. It's not even I don't know. People aren't even get to a point where they even, for you to say I don't know, you have to agree with what's being presented to you.
That's a good point.
A lot of people still feel because of and I'm learning this now.
Right, because they will say, well, he deserved the beating. He did it to himself.
Right.
He allowed himself to be beaten.
We have to ask the questions now, because even for myself, and I think that we saw it depicted in what was that movie?
Buck the Preacher.
Buck and the Preacher.
Buck and the Preacher. Right.
I did not know that there was a relationship with runaway slaves and Native Americans.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
And that was depicted in
that's what I'm saying.
But
I didn't know
it makes logical sense because they're both kind of oppressed by the onslaught of the Europeans coming.
That relationship between the Native Americans and blacks, although at the outset was harmonious, there was a period of time where
natives had slaves too.
Natives actually sold out black refugees who were trying to flee states that had slave laws.
It's a classic and divide and conquer.
Right.
Oh yeah.
And turn them in for money.
There's that money again.
Commodity.
Right? So white supremacy is a system. It's a cancer. It'll infect you if you're not careful. And this is the reason why people who are against what we call the revisionist history of critical race theory is perpetuating this legacy of cancer into the next generation.
Well, we could go into it a little more because the reason I think that disturbing confidence of ignorance, the reason why you as a kind of blonde-eyed, blue-eyed guy don't really want to know about the oppression of someone of color is because it benefits you. Not only does it benefit you, it's the foundation of that system is something that's very brutal.
You mean even today?
Yeah, it sort of ricochets to today. Like in this episode, they speak about the beginning of white supremacy as the European state nations conspiring with the church to steal Muslim trading routes.
Yep.
And that went on for 400 years. Then when you do that, you as a person, as a human being, have to come up with an idea or a system or a theory that justifies that.
Right.
Because you're going to destroy these people. So you have to come up with it. And the idea is like, well, they don't deserve it. Or, what's the difference between us? Well, they're darker and we're lighter. That means that we're superior because they're allowing us to do that to them and we deserve it more. And I think that's where it starts.
And I want to go back to what Tony said about, white supremacy or people not being aware of it because it's a lifestyle or what have you, because it's something that we all collectively know. It existed with a purpose. So what I wanted to say is that when people start to understand or when they're growing up, let's just say slave masters or whoever, they have children, they tell them these things happened. But it becomes things in terms of slavery on how they, like you just explained, they took advantage of people and how they took things, by giving them a reason with an underlying meaning to it.
Yeah.
I'm saying that I know for a fact that, and I truly believe that when these people that you're talking about in your question, Tony, is that they know about it, but it becomes a it becomes a secret within the family. They don't really talk about it that much, but it exists. So
let me.
Well, I just want to end off with this. So the fact is that when it comes to us saying like white supremacy, it becomes like this mysterious room that you enter because you know what's going to come out. Not everyone's going to confess and say, yes, I am aware, because they know that their lives or their names, everything may change after that, because
Right,
no one's
their
going to
status
say,
are gonna
I've had
change.
so much fun in this position that I'm willing to let it go because we're talking about it. Not everyone's willing to have that conversation. Go ahead.
Absolutely. And to sort of further address what you're talking about, does it ricochet today? So you come up with this idea of pure-blooded people, as they did, and starting with the Spanish Inquisition. And then you develop that, you perfect it, then you export it into the West, into the Caribbean and the Americas, right? You go, all right, so we have this idea of superiority and inferiority, so we can march forward to these lands that we don't know and just put that on steroids and sort of develop that. And then we create nations based on that.
Yeah.
And that's just the beginning of the movie.
Yeah, I mean, look,
Yeah.
exactly. There's a lot more to talk about. We
just
just scratching the surface.
We just talked about literally the first 5 minutes.
I mean, look at how imagery works. Even in the most insidious, unassuming ways. You look at a movie, right? It's a musical. It's funny. It's jovial.
That's how he starts it off.
Right? You don't realize what's being propagated.
Right. I think he starts off with "On the Town."
On the town. You took
Yeah.
So it you know, people are singing and it's nice or whatever. But
and what they did in that film that's so insidious, and you never question it because it's this wonderful kind of whimsical music and people are dancing to it, is that they're what's the word I'm looking for?
Delineating between the brutes and the civilized.
Right, but what they're doing is they're mixing up history.
Right.
They're
time.
Right.
they're taking like Neanderthals, which were from Europe, right, and then they're mushing it together,
Fusing it with Native Americans.
with Native Americans and Africans.
Yes.
So they're basically saying like
Yeah, 'cause
Neanderthals
they were hitting
and
drums,
Africans are one and the
And
same.
they're giving a simian characteristic to the African too by
Yes.
Gene Kelly was pounding his chest and
Like a gorilla.
acting like a gorilla, whatever.
Yeah.
So that right there, that imagery is stuck in the minds of people to conflate being an ape to being black.
And that's where we are today still. It's not, it doesn't look like that now, but I think that, you know,
But when you peel the what's happened now is that there are layers that are built on top of it.
Right.
Sophisticated layers.
right, but that's why the title of the first part was so wonderful, because there is a confidence in ignorance, because at that time people saw that regular folks who may not be racist and look at that movie and find nothing wrong with that.
Right.
So that's probably happening now. There's probably imagery that we're probably even oblivious to, or probably systems or things that are happening today that we're not even
Well,
appalled
I'll give you a perfect example,
Yeah.
because I showed this to Reginald the other day, and this is when we were speaking about, you know, I spoke to you different times each about the imagery for our podcast, and I was speaking to Reginald about, is there a Caribbean flag? I couldn't find a Caribbean flag. I found a European flag, and I found a flag that was developed by Marcus Garvey, Pan-African flag.
Yeah.
But
Nothing
there's a
for
European
Western, yeah.
flag. There is no Asian flag. As far as Asians are concerned, there's no African flag, right? So right there, that tells you who was the dominant culture, right? And we're kind of, if you never sit down and think about it, you're like, oh, well, that makes sense. European flag and no one else has a flag. But what I'm trying to say is that even in the symbols that we see, it's sort of saying Eurocentric is a dominant.
It's true.
So this highlights, in my opinion, the ignorance of people that think multiculturalism is the death to whiteness. Once you introduce multiculturalism, I think
What's multiculturalism?
The infusion and the acceptance of multiple cultures and ethnicities,
Like what was happening
under
in Sweden.
in Sweden, in a particular country or in a particular society. I think what might be considered to be the dominant society feels threatened by the multiculturalism in their environment.
Right.
They
You
feel
mean
that
the fact that
it
there's
threatens
no
their whiteness.
right. There's no that
Purity.
Right. There's challenges the fiction of purity.
Right.
And the thing about that is, even on the face of it, at least for me, it's ignorant because every empire has a rise and fall, right? There was an Egyptian empire. There was a Persian empire. There was a British empire. They all rose and fell. So how are you going to defy the natural course of things?
And he even says in the documentary that race is a made-up thing, and which is why the ignorance that white supremacists fall victim to is part of the problem, because they're thinking that their race is being diluted or whatever it is. But you gotta think of yourself as a human before you think yourself as
Whatever.
an ethnic background or a particular race.
Right.
And the problem with the world is that we bought into the idea that there's superiority within the races. We qualify races in terms of good, better, best, or not as good.
Right.
That's a problem, and it's not just in America. White supremacy has convinced the rest of the world to play by those rules.
Right. Even in some place like China, which you'd think would be understanding of it, the Chinese market, they don't like to see brown people in film.
Yeah, they don't. Even brown Chinese people.
Right.
Or Asian people. That's just because I don't want to say it's not
yeah.
all China. There's
Right.
other Asian countries that have the same problem.
Yeah.
Even India. India is predominantly brown.
Yeah.
But if you look at
The top
biggest
Bollywood stars, they're
look
usually
at
light skinned.
Priyanka Chopra is one of the biggest, if not the biggest,
Even in Latin countries.
Indian, former Bollywood. She's crossed over to a certain degree.
Yeah.
But these are phenotypically the people you'll see in
Lead roles.
Hollywood and Bollywood movies.
So let me challenge you. If I am someone who is white and I'm listening to this, I'm going to yell back at my headphones or the speaker, and I'm going to say, but we're dominant because we're smarter, and we're obviously smarter because we were able to enslave you guys, and so what's the problem?
I would tell that person, read a book.
This guy, this Raoul Peck guy is just speaking nonsense.
I will tell that person, read a book, read a few books, because a person who would make that comment,
and there are
is
people,
not a learned person.
and there are people out there that think that, by the way.
And they might be learned in one area of history because they choose to close off the other areas of history that can either debunk what they believe,
Right.
challenge what they believe, or support what they believe.
Right.
But these people are usually very myopic. They're not looking at global history. They're looking at European history.
But
And that's the problem
also
with
that
those
person
people.
would say, like, well, we came here and we had to defend ourselves. I mean, from
Defend
But
himself
this is
from
what this documentary talks about. It highlights the fact that they didn't have to defend themselves. The Native Americans welcomed the European settlers, but the European settlers saw that this land belonged to them. There was no sense of land ownership in pre-Columbian America.
That's their problem. That's their problem that they didn't see it. We came, we saw it, and they were
I'm
stupid enough.
addressing the question you posed about them defending them. There was no need to defend themselves to a certain extent. The defense aspect happened after they became the aggressors. And of course, this is your land.
You're going to defend yourself.
You're going to defend yourself, obviously, right? But the narrative that we've been told was that it's cowboys and Indians. The Indians are evil because they're naturally evil. They're corrupt. Same thing they said about black people. Black people are a certain way. This is why this documentary is so important. And to really further buttress what I'm saying here, the documentary goes on, and maybe I'm ahead of myself, but we'll revisit this later on, talking about different empires in the 16th century that were considered to be far more advanced than the Europeans during the Dark Ages, or the Middle Ages even, right? The Mughal Empire in India was far more advanced, but the advantage that the Europeans had was not in terms of resources, right? They didn't really have the natural resources that other continents had, but it's in the weapons they were able to develop, in the cannons they're able to mount on their ships, right? And those things gave them the leverage, or tipped the scales rather, to bring civilizations that are superior in most other aspects, but that one advantage they had allowed them to start the process of imperialism.
Right.
I would even say to that person who would make a comment like that based on what we're already responding to is that I could tell that the person is threatened, and they're also thinking the same way, you know, colonists did back then in taking over. I see the value in what you're doing, and I want to take advantage of that, but I'm going to give you a story to give it to me, and once I feel the leverage and I have the weapons, I'm going to take over the land. So I just, you know, going back into, you know, what we're talking about, the movies and things like that, and this language that's developed through film, I'm just going to come out here and say that when watching these movies, I think it's just continuing this theme of almost brainwashing people to believe this whole European theme. Like when we were talking earlier about the beginning of the movie when they were punching their chest, I immediately thought of King Kong and how they would always have this theme. I feel moving forward is to having this white image of a woman that you would save, and
you know what's funny about that? I'm just realizing,
what?
After all this time, King Kong is really about slavery, right?
Well, that's what I'm saying. That came to mind when we were talking about this. It reminded me of that because the whole pounding of the chest. You can even talk about Tarzan, but
but they capture King Kong,
right?
Put him in a cage, put him on a boat, bring him over, and then he escapes, right? And he takes the coveted white woman, right?
Who he also
and then,
liked.
Then he has to die because he takes the white woman.
But he also loved her too.
Right. But that's what they say about slaves, right? The narratives and the images, especially back in the 19th century and probably the 18th centuries of this, the threat is these dark people that are going to come and take our wonderful lily white people and corrupt them.
But that's what I'm saying happens in a lot of movies. That same theme repeats in action movies and all these different things over and over again, right, where you're protecting this white woman. But what I'm saying is, in terms of the movies that we're talking about and these directors that are not always responsible, to tell the truth and to break that theme and talk about something that is meaningful, to have people understand the realities of life. So I said that to say this. I said that because when it comes to when we talk about the Holocaust and all these different things, they talk about it to consistently talk about what happened and how it affected different people in different perspectives. And when it comes to talking about movies about slaves, yes, it could be repetitious, but what's wrong in talking about it when it's educating the people that it affected? And if we're going to talk about that, we have to make sure that it's the truth, because there's not one person outside of that culture that doesn't say, I don't know about Jewish culture and the history and all these different things, because they have to know about that. That's what confidently gets them through their lives moving forward. And I said that, I said that to say this. I said that to say this because I listened to what you said. That's the threat in white supremacy. If black people know their history, if they know their identity completely and confidently, then white supremacy starts to feel like the stage is being pulled under their feet.
And even talking about what you said regarding black people given the opportunity or the resources to know more about their history, the dominant society is going to downplay or invalidate that history. So that even when you come across it, you'll question, really?
Yeah.
What black civilization, there were empires in West Africa?
Right.
There was Egyptians were black.
Right.
There was another empire south of Egypt.
There were other medicines besides Western medicines?
Wait, white people didn't invent math?
Everything. Yep.
People were educated and built these systems.
Right. Ethiopia was a powerful empire. Like, what? Really?
How could white people come from Ethiopia?
Right. Yeah. Right. This is the thing. So, white supremacy enters every aspect of our culture and education and imagery. So, culture, education, imagery. It's a trifecta that causes people to swim and drown deeper into ignorance and into oppression. Because when you're presenting white people with these so-called facts that black people have always been savages, they'll believe that. And when you also convey that message to black people, they'll also believe that.
Which would lead to comments of questions of that nature that you just raised.
Yeah. Because you're it's like someone telling you that your mother is not your mother. You're someone's telling you like, that's not your mother. Your mother is this other woman that lives on the street. You have to sort of wrestle with that. And you have to sort of do your own due diligence to find that out. But if you're unwilling to do it, you're going to say, that guy's an idiot. This is my mother.
That's what it is.
Because if you start to wrestle with the fact that that homeless woman could possibly be your mother, your whole life changes.
Right. So
everything.
Don't just read the book. Make sure you read the right book.
But is it that simple though? Is it so simple for 38-year-old Caucasian male to hear us?
It depends on the person, right? It depends on the person. Like if that person is enlightened enough. I'll tell you this. Even if they don't acknowledge it, it still affects their lives. It still affects their lives in the sense that there'll always be that nagging voice in their head. And if they really don't want to do it, they'll double down on it. So it ultimately affects them versus someone who is a little more enlightened or a little more open, not even enlightened, because enlightened has its own sort of connotations. A little more open to be like, let me look into that. Let me see what that's all about.
I think what's important, right? If I'm a 38-year-old white male who lives in Wantagh, me acknowledging the past, I don't have to feel guilty about that. I'm just acknowledging it. I didn't do anything wrong.
If you fully acknowledge it, then if you say own a business, then you're going to if you really acknowledge it, then you're going to have to go out of your way to right the wrongs that your forefather may have done.
Because then you look like a prick.
If you show up to a party and you're like, these people have a right, and you say no, and then you turn around to at the end of the party, he goes, so you have a business? How many black people do you have there? And they go, I can't find enough black people. They're not qualified.
To piggyback on what you're saying, I think that acknowledging guilt is also connected to the idea of
putting responsibility on you.
Not just that, but tackling the issue of reparations.
Right.
So that's the problem with always circumventing guilt throughout these last 400 years. I think it has a lot to do with reparations. So much so, that's the reason why Jim Crow came in, because
it's doubling down.
Reparations wasn't a form of reconstruction.
Yeah.
Although that barely scratched the surface of what we were actually owed, right?
Yeah.
But it was a start, and very quickly we capitalized on the little advantages that we were given during that time period, and then Jim Crow comes along because reparations is an uncomfortable conversation because they think in their mind reparation is going to
tip the scales.
Tip the scales back to.
They didn't want to pick cotton.
Not just that. I think they fear that the supremacy will shift.
But also too, it's a even deeper guilt in the fact, like, if they say to themselves, if people did that to me, I would burn everything down.
Just fear.
This episode is brought to you by our sponsor, Double Bill Movies, a book club for movies. Watch 2 movies and join us to talk about it. A forum for avid and casual movie watchers to discuss how this medium shapes the way we see the world around us. Go to doublebillmovies.com for more details. Now, let's get back to the show.
Yeah, it's complicated. I don't think it's fair to put any broad umbrella answers over it because it's case sensitive.
It's like a building, right? So the foundation is this, violence and greed, because slavery is just greed. It's sort of like,
that's all it was.
That's essentially what it's commodifying greed, right? If
just to think about what they had to even do to get slaves and what they, oh my God,
logistics.
Right, like, what do you guys think about Josh Hartnett playing the role, which is his name, the name of the character is White Man.
Yeah.
I mean, again, if I was a white guy watching this, I would say, well, it's reverse discrimination because you're just reducing this man down to this one term, white man.
Right.
I mean, what do you guys think about that?
I think that also represents the people who are silent about white supremacy because they too are complicit.
And that's part of
if you are silent about white supremacy, then you are just as evil as the person who shackled my ancestors to come here.
Right.
To a certain extent. And I don't mean to say this in a harsh way. I'm just saying it so that people can understand how responsibility works. Because just look, an inheritance is something you get that you didn't work for.
Right.
And you accept it. You don't say, oh, that's my father's money. I can't accept this. This trust fund, it doesn't, I didn't work. I you know what? I have to respectfully decline for my integrity.
Right. Or the land that you got, the land that you got because you settled that piece of property. If you go, well, this was Indian territory. I can't accept that.
I can't accept this. So if you don't say that with money, you should also feel a sense of responsibility for if you have that type of integrity when it comes to inheritance, then it would make sense if you would say that, the sins of my fathers don't belong to me. You don't say that with inheritance. You take it. You gladly take the inheritance. But I think that people who are beneficiaries of privilege should also feel a sense of responsibility to righting the wrongs of their forefathers.
See, but that's also another complex thought, because many people feel that there have been reparations, that we have black presidents, and look at all of you guys who have land and who
I can address that right away.
College graduates and all these things.
I can address that right away.
Stop acting like you guys are still slaves. You guys are doing pretty great. You guys live in East Northport, and you guys get to go on trips and do all these things.
When was it that redlining stopped? Late 60s, right? It
didn't really stop.
It stopped formally, right?
Yeah.
In case people don't know, redlining is basically sort of local and federal government drawing lines saying that black people can only live in certain areas, right? Which perpetuated the images that we see now of the ghetto. The ghettos weren't created by black and brown people. They were created by
the dominant white society. That's barely 2 generations.
But how's that the answer?
Because the guy who inherited the property that was gained from in Iowa from his forefathers in 1874, right? That got passed down from generation to generation. They have generational wealth. We don't have generational wealth. So how can we pull ourselves up by our bootstraps when our parents are barely able to help us to get through college?
Because
Easy.
people will always bring up the exceptions to fight.
And
that
those are
argument.
just exceptions.
And
Those
that's
are
what
just
you mentioned,
exceptions.
too, what you're
Yeah.
talking about, that's the exception. When you look at the prison population, what's the demographic there? When you look at the wealth gap in America, what's the number there? When you look at the average savings of a white family versus the average savings of a black family, what's the number there? It is disproportionately higher.
So,
not
all right,
even,
so-
hold on, not even a little bit high. It's not like I'm saying, oh, Tony, you have $100,000 in the bank. You have a little bit of privilege because your forefathers, are the dominant people from 400 years. I used to be, my family used to be a slave. But look, I've made great strides and I have $80,000 in the bank. No, it's not
like
marginal. It's a
16
huge,
It's like I got $10 in the
it's a
bank.
huge
Right.
difference.
Right. But I'll push back a little more and be like, again, I'm pushing back as a this universal white person. So they would say, well, I have a business and I hire minorities in my business. How am I responsible for what my forefather did? My forefathers did. I'm trying to be conscious. I'm trying to be a good citizen. How is this still on me?
That goes into what Tony asked earlier in terms of that question. Sometimes the white supremacy doesn't realize, as much as they're trying to be sensitive, they're continuing what they have already inherited in terms of what we talked about
But
earlier.
I'm not continuing it. I have my closest friends are people of color. I have a business. One of my key staff is a person of color that I rely on regularly. How am I contributing to your oppression now?
What's the answer to that?
I don't know, but you
Right.
guys are saying that that it's sort of these generations of whites that have oppressed you. I'm turning things around as far as I'm concerned. Just my part.
But see, that's the thing. People are focused on the individual efforts of people, when that's not the answer to the problem. The problem is a systemic problem. You can't highlight that there's change in our society when one person does the right thing. Because there are many other people who don't, let's say, hire black people. There are many, look at the corporate boards of American companies.
Right.
How many black people are there? Very few.
And I, as this generic white guy, I would say, well, my key person of color, Jennifer, she's now a key person in my organization. Why can't other black people do the same thing and rise up to those corporate boards?
Because there are systemic problems that prevent people from maximizing their potential. And this is the problem we're having with society. There's a ceiling that black people live under because they don't have access to certain resources. And for them to break that ceiling, they have to be exceptional. They have to be exceptional black people. You have to be a Michael Jordan, an Oprah Winfrey, or, the people who are succeeding in America that are black have to be exceptional. You have to work many times harder than your white counterparts to get to a certain place. And the reason why it's like that is now you can't just highlight that one person that gave the black person a chance. You have to talk about how the system disproportionately puts black people in jail. You got to talk about the fact that there's a wealth gap in America between white and black that's not addressed.
So you're telling me that you're telling me that my employee Jennifer
Her son just graduated from an Ivy League school. I mean, why can't other black people do the same thing?
Because it's an exception to the rule. When you look at the problem, see, people are not looking at the macro. You look at the micro, and you're making the micro the rule. That's not the case. If you look at statistics, the demographics in our society, what is happening to certain groups, then you'll see there's a problem. It's not hard to see the problem.
Yeah, I think just because there aren't chains, shackles, and things of that nature, doesn't mean. Well, I would just say, how is that different from slavery? Just because you don't see any shackles.
But that is the argument. I hear it all the time that where when people say, oh, you're playing there goes so and so playing the black card again. Oh, there you go. There's a contingent of people that feel that groups like us, conversations like this, only gives our group an excuse for being mediocre.
That's false. Because given the opportunity, black people excel at everything.
Period.
Can you give me some examples?
Jazz music. That's a lack of opportunity that begets jazz music. Lack of opportunity in terms of like formal education in classical music, or access to being able to record music, being able to be an artist and freely express yourself. This is way after jazz music even was popularized, but during Nat King Cole had to perform behind a velvet curtain because people didn't want to see a black person singing on stage, right? So we're talking about when there's adversity, we rise to the occasion when given a little bit of opportunity. You look at the crack epidemic in the 80s, right? They criminalized drug users, not even drug dealers. You look at the opioid epidemic in this country now, there's public service, and I was saying, hey, if you're dealing with oxycodone, here's a hotline. Call us. We know that you're struggling. We want to help you. You have an entire generation of people, an entire generation where people have been incarcerated and families have been broken up. And you're talking about, and you
Destroyed.
Hear Candace Owens talking about, oh, the black family's been, decimated. Well, because there were systems in place that criminalized certain behavior that the other side didn't get charged for. A white man could snort all the coke he wants, and his jail sentence, if he gets caught, is minimal. It's a slap on the wrist compared to somebody with a little bit of even marijuana even. So that disparity in of itself is part of why there's a wealth gap in America.
Candace Owens, it's so funny because when you just said it, I was thinking about her too, because she has a lot of polarizing thoughts when it comes to this, if I can say that, right? And I know we're talking about Peck and the documentary, but I believe that all this kind of ties in.
Yes.
Because it's in the movie it said whoever wins the fight gets to tell the story.
Right.
And I think that's just where we are. We just want to say, hey, the story wasn't told accurately.
Accurately, right.
Not even close.
So, are there any other points for part one that you want to get to? Like, for instance, again, if I'm playing the role of this white guy,
Todd,
I'll say, so all right, let's say I accept everything that you're saying now. So you're saying that the Europeans teamed up with the church and they stole the trade routes, and then they exported that to the Caribbean and the Americas. What other systems were in place to perpetuate that?
Today or from back then?
From back then. Because I'm the thing that I saw in that particular episode in part one, there's religion, but there's that priest Bartolome who wanted to sort of divide up regions. So they wanted the Caribbean and the Americas. They wanted to free those people. They didn't want those people to be enslaved, but they wanted to get the Africans enslaved.
Right.
And so there's a system in place where America is just about land acquisition, and Africa is about resource acquisition. Ultimately, that's what it becomes.
Right, yeah.
But even though that particular priest kind of wants to make that distinction, there's still cross-pollination. They still brought slaves to Africa.
Because they needed the African labor to continue their wealth building exercise, for lack of a better term.
Right.
So Bartolome de las Casas, yeah, he resigned to the fact that the Indians were more closer to human, right? But he said that the Africans are more close to animals.
Yes.
Wow.
So you want to justify, because listen, when confronted with genocide, any human being would look at that and say, wow, that's evil.
Yes. But we should look
At
it
the
over.
time, they decimated the native population in South America. But you're still greedy, though. So what do? You absolve, for lack of a better term, you make an exception out of the Indians or the natives, but then you confer the title of animal over to another group,
Right.
to justify your greed. But see, this highlights the title of the second episode in the series.
It's my favorite title. Say it.
Who the fuck is Columbus?
That's right.
Thank you.
Next week, part 2 of our discussion on Raoul Peck. The audio clip of Raoul Peck was taken from the April 6, 2021 episode of the Film Comment Podcast. Thank you for spending time with Antilles.